Iran offered Hormuz. America said nuclear first. Putin said courageous. China built the gap. Today, let me describe 3 things that happened on Monday morning in the exact order they happened. Not because the order is dramatic, because the order is the entire story. First, Iran submitted a formal proposal to the United States through Pakistani mediators. The proposal said this: Iran will reopen the Strait of Hormuz and end the war if America lifts the naval blockade. Nuclear talks can happen later, in a separate process at a later stage. That is Iran's offer. Hormuz first, nuclear later, second. Marco Rubio appeared on Fox News and said this: the nuclear question is the reason why we're in this in the first place. And then, Iran's nuclear program remains the core issue. And then, we can't let them buy time. He described Iran's negotiators as skilled people who are serious about figuring out how they can buy themselves more time. He said America would not accept any arrangement where nuclear talks are postponed indefinitely. He said Iran cannot normalize Hormuz tolls. He said any deal must definitively prevent Iran from sprinting toward a nuclear weapon at any point. Third, while Rubio was saying all of that on Fox News, Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi was sitting across from Vladimir Putin in the Boris Yeltsin Presidential Library in Saint Petersburg. And Putin looked at Araghchi and said, "We see how courageously and heroically the people of Iran are fighting for their independence, for their sovereignty." And then Putin said, "Russia will do everything that serves your interests, the interests of all people of the region, so that peace can be achieved as soon as possible." Hold those 3 things in your head at the same time. Iran offered Hormuz. America said nuclear first. Russia called Iran courageous and promised to do everything, and China said nothing. I want to spend today explaining exactly why the gap between those 3 positions is not accidental, why the gap exists in this specific shape, what Iran's Hormuz first proposal actually reveals about the structural problem at the center of this war, what Rubio's response tells you about where America's leverage actually comes from, what Putin's language in Saint Petersburg is signaling to Tehran and to Washington simultaneously, and why China, which has said nothing and done nothing publicly, built the conditions that make all 3 of those positions possible at the same time. Let me start with Iran's proposal, because I think it is being misread in most of the coverage, and the misreading matters. The coverage frames Iran's proposal as Iran being flexible. Iran is offering a compromise. Iran is meeting America halfway. Iran will open Hormuz if America lifts the blockade. Nuclear can come later. That is not what the proposal is. Let me explain what it actually is. Axios reported it from a US official and 2 sources with direct knowledge. Reuters reported it from senior Iranian sources speaking on condition of anonymity. Here is what those sources said the proposal contains. First step, end the US-Israeli war on Iran and provide guarantees that Washington cannot restart it. Second step, resolve the blockade and the fate of the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran aims to reopen under its control. Only then, discuss nuclear with Iran still seeking US acknowledgement of its right to enrich uranium. Read those 3 steps carefully. The first step is not just a ceasefire. It is binding guarantees that America cannot restart the war. Iran is asking America to legally commit with some enforcement mechanism that it cannot resume military operations against Iran. That is not a ceasefire. That is a constraint on American military freedom of action in the Middle East, enforceable beyond whoever is in the White House. Think about what that means in practice. Any future American president who decides Iran's nuclear program requires military action would first have to either violate a binding international guarantee or formally withdraw from it with advance notice, both of which hand Iran a political victory before the first bomb is dropped. That is what Iran is asking for as step 1, not a pause in fighting, a structural limitation on American power. The second step is not just reopening Hormuz. It is reopening Hormuz under Iranian control. Tehran aims to reopen the strait under its control. That is the direct phrase from Reuters' senior Iranian sources. Not under international law, not under UNCLOS, under Iranian control. The toll system that Iran has been running since March, $2 million per ship, Iranian yuan payment mechanisms, IRGC escort corridors, would be the framework through which Hormuz operates. The Lloyd's List, intelligence confirmed payments, the CMA CGM and Mitsui OSK transits under IRGC escort on April 3rd, the central bank deposit of the first toll revenue that Iran's parliament confirmed. All of that becomes the normalized operating procedure for the world's most important maritime choke point. American ships would transit a strait governed by Iranian rules. That is what step 2 means. And the third step is nuclear, but only with Iran's right to enrichment acknowledged, not zero enrichment, not a decade pause. An acknowledgement from the United States that Iran has a right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. That is what Iran is calling a starting point for nuclear talks, which means the end point of nuclear talks, from Iran's perspective, begins from a U.S. position that enrichment itself is legitimate. Every subsequent negotiation about limits or verification or timelines happens with that acknowledgement already on the table. America cannot walk that acknowledgement back once it is made, and Iran can use it in every future forum to argue that its enrichment program has American recognition of its legal basis. Now, read Rubio's response with those details in mind. Rubio said, "The nuclear question is the reason why we're in this in the first place." He said Iran cannot normalize Hormuz tolls. He said those are international waterways and they cannot normalize, nor can we tolerate them trying to normalize. A system in which the Iranians decide who gets to use an international waterway and how much you have to pay them to use it. He said any deal must definitively prevent Iran from sprinting toward a nuclear weapon at any point. Rubio is rejecting all 3 steps simultaneously. He is rejecting binding war restart guarantees because accepting them would limit American military options. He is rejecting Iranian control of Hormuz because that would normalize tolls. And he is rejecting any nuclear framework that starts from a U.S. acknowledgement of enrichment rights because that would give Iran the baseline it needs to preserve its program indefinitely. The expert Danny Citrinowicz from Israel's Institute of National Security Studies put it plainly to CNN's Becky Anderson. He said, "I have serious doubts the U.S. will accept this offer because then the U.S. will lose leverage on the nuclear file." That sentence is the most clarifying thing said about this proposal in the entire news cycle. Rubio is not rejecting the proposal because it does not go far enough on nuclear. He is rejecting the proposal because accepting any version of Hormuz first strips America of the instrument it is using to pressure Iran on nuclear. The blockade is not just about oil. The blockade is the coercive mechanism for nuclear concessions. Lift it before nuclear is resolved, and the coercive mechanism is gone. And here is what that tells you about the structure of the problem. The two sides are not negotiating about the same thing. Iran thinks the war is about territory and sovereignty and regime survival. America thinks the war is about nuclear weapons. Iran's proposal says, solve the war first, then discuss nuclear. America's position says, the war is the mechanism for solving nuclear, so nuclear cannot be separated from the war. Those are not positions that split the difference. Those are fundamentally incompatible theories of what this negotiation is for. That gap between Iran's theory and America's theory of what is being negotiated is what Putin walked into in Saint Petersburg on Monday. Let me talk about what Putin actually said and what he was doing by saying it, because his language was specific and deliberate in ways that matter. Putin said the Iranian people are fighting courageously and heroically for their independence and sovereignty. Not that Iran is right on the nuclear issue. Not that America is wrong in its demands. Not that the blockade is illegal or the proposal is fair. He said the Iranian people are fighting courageously. That is the language of solidarity without endorsement of specific positions. It is the language Russia uses when it wants to signal support while retaining diplomatic flexibility. But then Putin said something more specific. He said he received a message from Iran's new Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, the previous week, and he conveyed his gratitude and best wishes for his health. That sentence is significant for several reasons. One, it confirms that Khamenei is communicating, is engaged in decision-making, is not incapacitated. The U.S. government has been publicly questioning whether Khamenei has authority over the negotiations. Rubio said on Fox News, "I think the question between alive and in power are two different questions." And Rubio questioned whether Araghchi had the authority to submit the proposal at all. By announcing publicly that he received a personal message from Khamenei, Putin is directly contradicting the American narrative that Iran's leadership is too fractured to make binding commitments. 2. Putin is telling Araghchi in front of cameras, with Russian state media running the full readout, that Russia's relationship with the Supreme Leader is direct and personal. not through intermediaries, not through the foreign ministry. Putin has a channel to Khamenei. That channel is now public knowledge, which means any American back-channel effort to reach Khamenei through Russia has to go through Putin first. Russia has just made itself the gatekeeper. Araghchi, for his part, said the world has now realized Iran's true power and that the Islamic Republic is a stable, solid, and powerful system. He said Tehran is looking into Trump's request for negotiations. His framing, Trump requested negotiations, not Iran, because the U.S. has not achieved any of its objectives. And he said Iran is pleased to engage with Russia at the highest level and grateful for solidarity. He confirmed the Iran-Russia relationship as a strategic partnership at the highest level. That meeting in Saint Petersburg was not a briefing. It was a demonstration. Iran flew its foreign minister to Russia to demonstrate in front of cameras that Russia is fully behind Tehran, that Russia has direct access to Iran's Supreme Leader, and that Iran describes the strategic partnership as operating at the highest level. That demonstration is aimed at an audience that is not in the room. It is aimed at Washington. Now let me talk about the German element, because Friedrich Merz said something on Monday that no American ally has said publicly at any point in this war, and it deserves careful attention. Germany's chancellor said, and I want to quote this precisely, "The U.S. is being humiliated by Iran." He said he was not consulted before the February 28th strikes began. He said if he had known it would continue like this for 5 or 6 weeks and get progressively worse, he would have told Trump even more emphatically of his skepticism. He compared the Iran war to Iraq and Afghanistan, two conflicts that America entered with overwhelming initial military success and then spent years unable to exit cleanly. He said it is evident the strait has been at least partially mined and offered to send German minesweepers to help clear it. He reiterated that Europeans were not consulted before the strikes began. A sitting German chancellor, America's most important European ally, the leader of the country that hosts more American military personnel than any other European nation, said the United States is being humiliated in a war it started without consulting its allies. In public, in a recorded speech that went out on every major wire service simultaneously, while the White House was issuing statements saying America holds all the cards. Let me be specific about why this matters beyond the diplomatic embarrassment. Merz is not a marginal figure making a fringe argument. Germany has the largest economy in Europe. Germany hosts Ramstein Air Base, the hub for American military logistics across Europe and the Middle East. Germany sits on the NATO Council. When Germany's chancellor says publicly that America is being humiliated, that statement travels to every capital in the world and lands differently than if a smaller ally had said it. It tells Iran, your strategy is working even in Washington's most important European alliance. It tells Russia, European solidarity with American war aims is fractured at the highest level. It tells China, the post-war diplomatic order is going to be contested and the U.S. starting position is not strong. That is not just an embarrassment. That is a structural signal about what the world looks like after this war ends. Now let me steelman the American position. Because Rubio is not wrong about the core strategic problem. If America accepts Iran's proposal, Hormuz first, nuclear later, America lifts the blockade, ends the war, and removes the coercive pressure that it has been applying since April 13th. Iran's oil starts flowing again. Iran's revenue recovers. The economic pain that Trump says is causing Iran to collapse, $500 million a day in losses, 44 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, an internet blackout at 56 days. All of that pressure dissipates the moment the blockade is lifted and the war ends. And then what? America goes back to Iran and says, now let's talk nuclear. Iran says, the war's over, the blockade is gone. We already gave you Hormuz. Why would we give you the nuclear file too? The leverage is gone. The coercive mechanism is gone. And Iran has its strategic partnership with Russia at the highest level, and its oil flowing again, and its Hormuz toll system running, and whatever guarantees it extracted in the first step of the deal. The nuclear conversation happens not from a position of American pressure, but from a position of Iranian recovery. That is the structural problem Rubio is trying to avoid. He is right about the logic. Here is where the Steelman collapses. The alternative, maintaining the blockade and refusing Iran's Hormuz first offer, requires America to sustain economic pressure on Iran indefinitely until Iran agrees to nuclear concessions it has steadfastly refused since the war began on February 28th. Iran's leadership is not collapsing. Khamenei is communicating. The IRGC is still operational. Russia is at the highest level of partnership. China is buying nearly 1 million barrels of Iranian crude per day. Germany is calling America humiliated. The 3 aircraft carriers in the region cost money every single day. Brent crude is at $106 per barrel, up 17% last week, the biggest weekly gain since the war began. American consumers are paying higher fuel costs. American airlines are adjusting routes. American manufacturers are absorbing higher energy input costs. And here's the thing that most people in the American policy conversation are not saying clearly. The nuclear deal that America says it needs, Iran suspending enrichment for a decade and handing over its enriched uranium, was already tried. It was the JCPOA. Iran complied with every provision. The IAEA confirmed compliance at the moment of the American exit. Iran shipped low-enriched uranium to Russia. Iran accepted inspections at declared sites. Iran reduced its centrifuge count by 2/3. Iran did every technical thing America and the P5+1 asked for. And in May 2018, Trump walked away from it anyway, unilaterally, without Iran violating a single provision, and then reimposed sanctions, and then added more, and then designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization, and then started maximum pressure. And then when maximum pressure produced nothing, America started a war. From Iran's perspective, every American demand has been tried before, failed, or been abandoned. Compliance produced the JCPOA. The JCPOA produced American withdrawal. American withdrawal produced maximum pressure. Maximum pressure produced this war. And this war, 60 days in with Iran still standing and its foreign minister sitting with Putin in Saint Petersburg, is producing Russian solidarity and German accusations of humiliation and a UN Security Council that cannot pass a resolution because China and Russia veto it. The lesson Iran has drawn from that sequence is this: compliance does not produce security. Defiance is more durable than concession. And a strategic partnership with Russia and China's purchasing volume provides more protection than any American guarantee. Araghchi told Putin, Trump requested negotiations because the U.S. has not achieved any of its objectives. That is Iran's read of where 60 days have left things. And from where I stand, looking at the evidence, that read is not obviously wrong. That is the gap China built. Not by starting a war, not by making threats, not by sending troops to the Persian Gulf. By doing 3 specific things continuously since February 28th. First, buying Iranian crude every single day, keeping Iran financially stable enough to reject American proposals and conduct 3-continent diplomatic tours. 985,000 barrels per day, confirmed by Kepler's satellite data, continuous throughout the blockade, uninterrupted by American pressure. Second, providing the yuan-based payment infrastructure and the CIPS banking alternative that allows Iran to collect Hormuz tolls outside the dollar system, making the toll revenue real and the governance framework financially operational. Third, vetoing the UN Security Council resolution that sought freedom of navigation in Hormuz alongside Russia on April 10th, giving Iran the diplomatic cover it needed to maintain the toll system without facing an international legal ruling against it. Those 3 things did not create the Iran-America gap. The JCPOA exit of 2018 created the gap. The maximum pressure campaign deepened it. The February 28th war widened it further. China did not create the gap. China built the financial and diplomatic architecture inside the gap that makes it permanent rather than temporary. Iran can survive inside this gap indefinitely because China buys the oil and Russia provides the solidarity, and both provide the UN cover. Without China's purchasing, Iran's revenue collapses within months, and the proposal Iran submitted Monday never gets written because Iran has no negotiating position left. With China's purchasing running at nearly 1 million barrels per day, Iran has the revenue, the time, and the diplomatic credibility to submit a Hormuz first proposal and wait for America to respond. That is the gap China built. And on Monday, while Rubio said nuclear first on Fox News and Putin said courageous in Saint Petersburg, and Merz said humiliated in Berlin, China said nothing. China did not need to say anything. The gap it built is doing the talking. What I want you to watch in the coming days is simple but specific. Watch whether Trump's Situation Room review of Iran's proposal produces a counter-proposal or a flat rejection. A counter-proposal means America is engaging with the Hormuz First framework and trying to reshape it, perhaps accepting some version of Hormuz First in exchange for a binding Iranian commitment on the nuclear timeline before the blockade is lifted. A flat rejection means the blockade continues, and the next move is either escalation or a new Iranian proposal from a stronger position after Russia's visit. The difference between those two responses will tell you whether there is a diplomatic path open or whether this goes back to military pressure. Watch whether Iran, as Araghchi said in Russia, makes what he called the appropriate decision regarding the current diplomatic process. That phrase is the most important sentence Araghchi said in St. Petersburg, and almost nobody is treating it as such. He said Tehran will make the appropriate decision in light of what he called Washington's destructive habits: unreasonable demands, frequently changing positions, threatening rhetoric, repeatedly breaching commitments. The appropriate decision is either to continue the diplomatic process with a new proposal or to conclude that the diplomatic process is not working and shift strategy. If Iran shifts strategy, the next signal will not be a proposal through Pakistan. It will be something in Hormuz. Watch the IRGC Navy. Watch Germany specifically. Merz offered German minesweepers to help clear Hormuz. That offer is sitting on the table unaccepted. If America accepts the German offer, it means America is building a multilateral coalition for Hormuz operations that bypasses Iran's toll system through military force. If America ignores it, it means America is still hoping for a bilateral deal. The minesweeper offer is a real-time indicator of which direction the Situation Room meeting went. And watch China, not for a statement. China will not make a statement. Watch the KP layer data for Iranian crude purchases in the next 10 days. If China's purchasing volume increases, China is signaling confidence that the stalemate continues and Iran's negotiating position holds. If China's purchasing volume drops, something has changed in the back-channel conversation between Beijing and Tehran that is not visible in any public statement. The oil purchases are the one number that cannot be faked or spun. They are the most honest signal in this entire conflict. Iran offered Hormuz. America said nuclear first. Putin said courageous. Germany said humiliated. China said nothing and bought another 1 million barrels. The gap between those four positions is where the next 60 days of this war will be decided. If you found this useful, push back on it in the comments. I will see you in the next one.